All right. Welcome, Tammy.
Thank you so much. I love your podcast so much. Like everybody you talk to is just so fascinating. So this morning I'm like, I've got to live up to this.
Oh,
So,
you're perfect. I've been really looking forward to talking with you, and yeah, so much that we can get into. And I love that you do speak astrology also. So we'll be looking at that angle. But as we get started, just let us know a little bit about the work that you do with supporting women in recovery, and whatever else you want to share about yourself as we get started.
sure. Um, my history was I spent a couple of decades in corporate, had my own awakening, and through that awakening journey, got sober. And before getting sober, I had already started tapping into astrology and mysticism and yoga and creativity, all those kind of things. And so I really believe that those things shifted my vibration enough that I was able to get sober. But anyway, my approach to recovery, I did go the traditional route as far as 12-step meetings, but it was never enough. I knew I needed all of these other, what I would call feminine, divine feminine elements that I needed those. So I kind of created my own path. And through that, have stayed sober for 15 years. And so then my career path kind of, I was just naturally drawn to women who were interested in getting sober. And through the years, what I've discovered is that those who struggle with, especially substance addictions, are the most highly sensitive, highly attuned, tuned in beings on the planet. And so I just love working with people who are aware of that and are aware of when it started getting shut down, because then we can work with that element to open them back up to the gifts that are there just waiting. And so me, along with Whitney Freya, have created a program that really brings in so much of the sacred feminine and creativity, sacred geometry, just all kinds of fun stuff.
And there's a lot in there that I want to get into, but just in terms of the work that you're doing with Whitney, and thank you to Whitney for connecting us. And you mentioned a new paradigm of recovery for women. So can you say more about what is that feminine approach, and how do you use creativity, and why is that so useful for recovery from addiction?
Yeah. So if you think of it from the foundational standpoint of just vibration and frequency, addiction is, it's just filled with shame and is just a very low vibration. So one of the things I discovered when I was going through the process is the more I focused on the addiction, the worse I felt. But the more I focused on the things I love and was really nurturing, these creative, intuitive gifts, it just seemed like the addictive patterns would fall away much more easily. And so that's where Whitney and I really started was, what if we focus on what we're wanting to create versus what we're trying to get rid of, and do it in community. And then also from the feminine standpoint, in a softer, more spacious way, which is, soft and spacious are not our cultural norm, and so really having a lot of compassion for ourselves, loving ourselves through recovery, and from every aspect, not pathologizing the addiction, but just seeing it as part of the underworld journey. And any good myth has an underworld journey, and then there's the rising up out of it. So really reframing all of that, um, and love, compassion, and gratitude for the journey are just the absolute foundation of, no matter, and I even think of like Matt Kahn's phrase, whatever arises, love that. Like there's nothing that we're going to tackle or beat or, you know, we're not going to wrestle something to the ground. We're just going to love ourselves into this, you know, I'm quoting people here today, but Mary Oliver, the soft animal of our body, like really tuning into the body as well and listening and being in relationship with earth, with body, with movement, and just all the feminine aspects of healing.
What you're saying is really moving to me. I don't know if it's all the planets in Pisces right now, but I got kind of teary as you were talking about that, because I think there can be this idea that if you have an addiction, it's because you're weak and you need to have stronger willpower and get out the stick and, beat yourself into sobriety. And obviously that just doesn't work for probably most people, that kind
Right.
of approach of like toughing it out. And so this idea of soft and spacious, and also being in community seems really important. And of course there is that AA model, which
Right.
we're going to come back to astrologically, but also thinking about a kind of creative community that's supporting more of what you love, and so much compassion. That just sounds really sweet and helpful.
Yeah. And we've opened it up. It's not just for people recovering from addictions, because I mean, everybody's recovering from something, whether it's, you know, a chronic health issue or a horrible divorce, or, you know, a very huge transition happening on the planet right now. We're all recovering from where we've been, you know.
Well, and that's something I want to ask you about too, because there are the obvious addictions if someone's an alcoholic or abusing substances, but then it just seems like most people are addicted to something, and there's the socially approved of addictions like caffeine or sugar or technology or workaholism.
Yeah.
And I remember having a conversation with a friend a long time ago. We were talking about 12-step groups, um and we were like, why isn't there just a group for anyone? Like I don't fit into this one, I don't fit into that one, I don't fit into this one, but I have all the same problems at some level, or struggles. And yeah, so it seems like everyone, there's a place for everyone in recovery.
Right. Yeah. And that in the meetings that we lead, I mean, the people there are recovering from all kinds of things, but the solution is the same for all of us. The problem is different but we don't talk about the problem. I mean, it comes up some, but it's not the focus. So it doesn't really matter in our recovery circles, because we're focused on creating the life we love and
Right,
navigating the triggers and the challenges.
right. And I want to come back to what you were saying about highly sensitive people.
Mm.
First of all, how does someone know if they would fall into that category?
The way I got versed in it is I was clinical director of a women's treatment center, and I'd already discovered I was highly sensitive through the work of Elaine Aaron. She's a psychologist that has just a simple online assessment you can take. And her book is called The Highly Sensitive Person. And it's really all comes down to the nervous system. If a person gets overstimulated easily, through any of the senses. And I think it's an interesting time to be thinking about if people, like, ultimately I think we're all highly sensitive. It's just that we are so layered and armored up that most people don't even realize it. And so then most likely the women I've worked with are not just highly sensitive, but also highly empathic, which those two things are, somewhat different, because the empath feels everything around them and feels other people's feelings and can, really sense the energy in the room. But the highly sensitive person is, it's all within the nervous system.
Mm-hmm. So, and I heard you say before in another podcast that the empaths are like at the far end or the extreme end of on the sensitivity spectrum. Is that the idea?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and it just makes perfect sense that high sensitivity would go along with addiction because you want to this is a harsh world and we want to numb out, and then of course that usually doesn't work so well in the long term.
Right.
So how how can we go from being, because I also identify as a highly sensitive person, an empath, how can we work with that sensitivity as our superpower versus just being taken out by it or so overwhelmed by it?
Well, I mean, I think that's the true recovery right there. It's like recovering our essence of who we are. And I guess the short answer would be radical self-care, that we can't live by the societal norms. We can't go at that pace. That's what one of the things that I'm most passionate about is leading women's retreats. And I'm passionate about it because I had somebody say that there's a retreat archetype. And when I heard that, I was like, I carry that. I know I do. Because that within me, I just have this knowing of how much we just need like deep listening, not a vacation, but a time to really go into rest and restoration and deep listening. And so I think that, just learning to live in again, a slower, more spacious and more compassionate way toward ourselves is probably the best thing we can possibly do when we're highly sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that requires disappointing people and, just not living according to the pace that our world is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard you talk about both self-care and also soul care.
Mhm.
And what would you say the difference is, or what exactly do you mean by soul care? How do we do that?
Well, I think it does take deep rest and listening to even be able to get to that level, but it's just that deepest aspect of ourselves, that really quiet voice that is, I just think of like at that soul level, it's just so precious, but yet it's filled with so much wisdom. And that's where our deepest desires are. And that, being able to really care for that aspect is what's going to lead us to like living our most vibrant, creative, lit up life, because that the soul knows that's where our true desires are. And really listening to the soul and taking care at that level, you're really going to disappoint some people around you.
Indeed. I mean, and this is where it seems like community is so essential, because what you're talking about is very counter to how mainstream society functions, which is go, 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 and you got to have your plan and know what's happening. And it's always on to the next thing, no time for rest and dreaming and creativity and those frivolous things. So to have a community that really holds you and respects that process and sees the necessity of that process. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we help each other remember that truth, and because it's so easy to get sucked into just the mainstream culture. So yeah, that week, us coming together weekly, that's one of our biggest parts, is we remember who we really are, and give ourselves permission to do that level of soul care. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so what we're talking about here, we're talking about rest and spaciousness and addiction and sensitivity and creativity. And these are all Piscean themes.
Right.
And not only are we having this conversation at a time when we've got a big lineup of planets in Pisces, but also just in terms of the bigger context of where we're at as a collective, making this transition from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. As I've said many times, I don't know when exactly that transition happens, but it seems clear to me that we're in it. And as we're in it, we have all of these shadow or distorted expressions of Pisces coming up: the addiction, the escapism, denial, delusion, drugs, um, all coming up to be healed and cleared. And I think to take us on a journey to the more conscious expression of Pisces, which would be the compassion and uh, deep, unconditional love and honoring our soul selves, our spiritual essence. So, how, yeah, what are your thoughts about this? This bigger Pisces unfolding, or even this current moment of Saturn in Pisces, Neptune in Pisces.
Yeah, I love Saturn in Pisces because to me that's what really brings the compassion, the self-love, the dreams into 3D reality. It's like I love that aspect because it's like, yes, this is a way we can live day to day and not have to go into the shadow aspect and escape. But it takes that Saturnian discipline, I mean, just everything we've already been talking about, like you've got to be willing to disappoint people. You've got to be disciplined to your own soul. And, I've heard so many people like being afraid of Saturn, but it's just been remarkable for me to bring this way of life in which, as you know, I've got, my Saturn is in Pisces, 0 degrees of Pisces. So I feel very familiar with that placement. And I feel like intuitively, I just feel like it's like this, this clarion call of, yeah, right now is the time you're probably gonna want to check out because things are so heated up. But it's actually a time where if we can shift the narrative and pull this new way into reality, it can really shift the narrative. And and I feel like that's why this program that Whitney and I co-created came in at this time. And she and I both have, some significant Pisces stuff going on in our chart.
Yeah, I think Saturn in Pisces is such an interesting placement because, like you said, Saturn is about discipline. And I don't want to say, well, let's say taking charge or being an authority, and also about creating a container, creating the structure or the form. And like you were saying, bringing things into manifestation. And then we have Pisces, which is surrender and letting go and, let go, let God, goddess, right? And it's so fluid and it's so vast and it's so infinite. How do we find a container for that? How do we ground that? Um, and it seems like with Saturn being in Pisces now, and for those who were not aware, Saturn went into Pisces in March of 2023 and will be there until I think it's February 2026. And thinking about this as a time when we're really being called to do the work. Saturn's so much about showing up and doing the work at that deep soul level and at the level of consciousness, at the level of the unconscious. I mean, one of the ways I think about Saturn is as a kind of cleanup crew. So now the cleanup crew is coming into Pisces land and saying, okay, where are we escaping instead of dealing, and what does our soul really need to come into integrity, or for our lives to come into greater integrity to honor our deeper soul self. So it's a very rich time to be doing this deep inner work and really taking that level of reality very seriously. Saturn is about getting serious. And you had such a great uh, insight or revelation earlier that you shared with me before we started recording. Do you want to share that Saturn and Pisces insight?
Sure. Yeah. So so the founder of AA's name was Bill Wilson. And I have, through this whole process, I keep feeling his presence over my left shoulder. And the left shoulder, I think of that as being the feminine side. And I feel like he, even though I know they didn't do high fives in the 20s, I feel like he's high-fiving me. So it feels very encouraging, because that was a patriarchal model. It came into being in the 20s for men. So of course it's a patriarchal model. But what I know is that Bill W. was a mystic, and he had a mystical experience. And so that's why I've felt comfortable having him, at my back. So before getting on this podcast, I called him in and was like, please be with me, inform me, I want to be in integrity. And it was 15 minutes before, and he said, what I heard was something I'd never heard before. He said, you need to look at my chart. And I'm like, oh my gosh, why had I never looked at his chart? So I'm like, punching it in really quick. And his North Node is in Pisces. And then I ran a transit chart with the founding date of AA, and Saturn was in Pisces conjunct his North Node. And it just kind of blew my mind.
Yes, and as I shared, astrology continually blows my mind, and that's so literal. So that at that moment, he's finding or creating this form, this structure to anchor in this really healing and conscious expression of Pisces.
Right.
That's incredible. Yeah. So and also great to have that perspective that, okay, that was Saturn in Pisces, the founding of AA. Now we have another Saturn in Pisces, and Saturn has about a 29-year cycle. So every 29 years or so, we get Saturn in Pisces. And so it's interesting to think about the work that you're doing now in terms of creating a different kind of structure. And
Right.
And 100 years later, what's the next evolution or next expression of that structure? And I also hadn't realized that AA was originally founded. Was it just for men?
Yeah.
Initially?
Yeah.
Interesting.
It was.
Interesting.
Yeah. And Codependence Anonymous came out of that, because the wives were like, well, what about us? And so they didn't go to the AA meetings, they formed their own meetings. And that was more where the codependent aspect came in.
Mm-hmm. That is wild. And do you work with astrology in terms of working with your clients?
Yes.
How do you use astrology with them?
Well, it's like, how could I not, it just, once I started understanding it, it was like, oh my gosh, it's all laid out right there. So it, again, just, I view astrology as everything is there for us. It's all to support us. And, because I also do family constellation work, which is accessing the quantum field, then what I do is have my clients access the field and access we'll pick, a certain transit or natal placement that they're curious about. And so they access that through their body. And what I've found is it's a very embodied experience, and they get, another friend and I together discovered this approach. We just kind of fell into it. And so now we get in the field with transits in our charts all the time. And then I use this with clients so that they can get a visual, it's like they get an embodied visual symbolic energy to carry with them, instead of it just being 0 degrees Saturn in Pisces. It's something, and I can give an example. When I stepped into my Saturn in Pisces, I was looking out at beautiful nature, but it was like watching it on a movie screen. It's like it wasn't real. And it took me opening the doors and putting feet on the earth and feeling the wind on my face it was like to really embody it. And so I use that. I mean, going back to, it's like Pisces was almost inaccessible to me until I stepped into the field, and that embodied approach really helped me access Pisces in a deeper way in my body, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. I think that's super cool. I love any kind of playing with astrology that gets us out of our heads and into the direct experience of it. And I'm curious, since it seems like you were born with Saturn in Pisces, you're in your second Saturn return, so obviously you've learned a lot about how to work with Saturn in Pisces. What are some other, like, how can the rest of us be working productively with Saturn in Pisces for the next couple of years?
Well, I also have a Virgo stellium, so I feel like I've spent I mean, to me, I never could access the Pisces in a healthy way. And that's why, alcohol was, I mean, it's called spirits, so I was seeking it in the shadow realm. And
Yes.
so it has been the last 15 years. When you were talking about Pisces being surrender and all these things that aren't contained, I mean, I feel like that's what Saturn does, is it helps us bring practices into place, that it does bring a container. Because if you don't surrender with some kind of community or some kind of container, it can just be a hot mess. um
Well,
so
and surrender, that's tricky in terms of Pisces, because there can be the more victimy or help, like, I'm just surrendering to whatever, a sort of unconscious surrender versus the conscious surrender, and like, what exactly are we surrendering to? And is that, yeah, so can you talk more about surrender? How do we do that in a conscious and useful way?
Uh, that's a good question. Yeah, when you were saying that about victimy surrender, I was thinking more like collapse,
Right, right.
Yeah. And again, for me, it's always been about having practices and community. And I mean, that's what it's been levels and layers and layers of surrender through the years, but it's because I've had a morning practice, a journaling, a meditation, of yoga, so I've been able to keep my nervous system regulated. I think otherwise, the surrender could have been messy. And, a lot of times surrender is messy and you end up having a health crisis, or, end up in a psych ward, or all kinds of things. So yeah, for me, and maybe it is because I've got that Virgo stellium and I like Saturn so much, but it's the container, the practice, the community, having structure around it.
Hmm. Yeah, it seems like you're really majoring in that Virgo Pisces polarity.
Right.
And even though I don't have any planets in Pisces, I do have the Virgo stellium as well. And I feel like that's, whenever, and for those who don't know, a stellium means having four planets in the same sign. And whenever you have a strong emphasis on one sign, you really have to learn how to lean into the opposite. So I feel like for me also, it's been a similar journey of balancing how to balance out the Virgo in a healthy way that's not about, okay, now I'm going to be a workaholic and beat up on myself and be super perfectionist, and then I'm just going to totally check out and space out or be attracted to people who are, very, I don't know, in addictive patterns or whatever. Like, how
Right.
to bring in the Pisces in a conscious and useful way. Um, and yeah, I think there is something so important about the consistency of showing up, to sort of bringing in the Saturn discipline, just to show up consistently for those practices. Um, but then it's like within the practices themselves, that's maybe where more of the surrender comes in. I'm thinking about creativity here and the creative process. How do you
Mhm.
think that those dynamics play out in terms of creating, because it can be easy, even for people who don't have a Virgo stellium, to be very perfectionist when it comes to, painting or drawing or writing, and that can just really shut down the flow. So, and there is a certain amount of surrender that comes into the creative process. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about creativity in that sense?
Yeah, well, again, I think Saturn is a great teacher with that, because I think it also requires a practice, because the more just the awareness around our culture that is so product driven, and if we can get in the practice of creating just for the sake of creating, and then using the art journal, the canvas, or whatever, just as a mirror for what's going on, um, you know, in classes that I teach, which I've learned from Whitney, is, if we can, no matter what's showing up on the canvas, if it's, oh, it's ugly and I want to cover it up as quick as possible, well, let's slow down and be with the ugly, and so no matter what it is, working with it. And if you're wanting to race through it, how about we slow? For me, it always comes back to slowing down. But I think, I believe that's one of the huge things we're missing right now, is a creative culture. We are always consuming instead of creating, and it's hard to create just for the sake of creating. It's like, it's wasting time, it's wasting money. That's the voice that can be in the head. But it's critical for us to create a new earth, to be practicing creating, and to be curious about what comes through. Because the other thing I've seen is, if we can slow down, and if they're, oh, I don't like what's on the canvas, slow down, let's look at it closer, and all of a sudden magic appears. It's just, remarkable things that are there. But it really does take slowing down, being present, and curious. And all things, again, I don't think we're so great at as a culture.
Not at all. And I completely agree that creative practice is a practice of creating our world and creating our lives, and knowing our creative power.
Right.
How did you get started in painting or in creative practice?
I was one of those people that grew up being told we're not creative people, and I, believed it. And then I met Whitney. We both lived in Nashville, and she had a course that was just, it wasn't called Painting for Dummies, but it was more or less, Painting Made Easy. That's what it was called. And I thought, well, why not? Let's just try it. And when I found out that you could just paint back over a canvas, I just thought that was brilliant. And it was like, well, I could do this. And it was just, from the very first brush stroke, I was hooked. I had so much pent up creative energy in me that was just wanting to come out. So yeah, that's how it got started. And then I got sober, and I painted my way through the first 2 years of sobriety. Just painted nonstop and processed so much, at the canvas. And then working with Whitney was really learning, that we are the artist of our lives, and we're it goes beyond the canvas. It's energy, it's our thoughts, it's, we are the master creators. What am I going to create today? So.
Mm-hmm. And how would you say your painting supported you through recovery, or yeah, how, what did that do for you?
It I think it's what I had always been seeking, like wanting to get into this altered state. And that's what would happen. I would just be just, so joyous and free and flowing. And in those first 2 years, I was also a member of an artist co-op, and I would go and just spend an entire weekends at the artist co-op with other artists, and we were just creating together. And if you talk about from a vibrational standpoint, that was way more inspiring than being at a bar. you and yeah, it just, it carried me through. And I've heard so many people talk about, how hard recovery was. And I've thought, it really wasn't that. Getting there was the hardest part for me, but it's like once I stepped through the door, it was just such relief because my soul had just been craving this creative way of life. And there was so much energy for it. I just had so much energy available for it.
That's amazing. And what you were saying about really working with what comes out instead of judging it, which can be the default mode, especially with a Virgo stellium. It reminded me, I did some process painting for a couple of years, many years ago, and the question that the facilitator would often ask is, what could you do to ruin this painting? If I really didn't like something, what could you do to make it even worse? And just that permission to make something a mess. It's like no one's gonna die.
Right.
No one's getting hurt here if I make a messy, angry, sloppy painting. So I think that was very helpful in terms of, I guess, like building the muscle of letting come out what needs to come out and not being so tightly controlled and so worried about every doing something wrong or getting it wrong, because that,
Right.
of course, is what keeps us from taking risks. And we can't expand, we can't create anything without taking risks.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, really embracing the shadow as well. So if shadow shows up on the canvas, it's like, well, the darker and uglier and murkier it is, on the other side of that is bright and light, that it takes both. So using the canvas to balance that out.
And again, thinking about Saturn in Pisces and this work at the unconscious level or working with the unconscious, and art is such an incredible way to connect with and express
Right.
what's what our minds might not even be aware of, or what we don't have words for, and
Right.
it's allowing that energy to move. And I would think if you had been an alcoholic for many years and then gave that up, that there was a lot that was a lot that had been suppressed or not felt or not brought into awareness, that through painting it seems like it was just pouring out of you for those years.
Yeah. Yeah. And also all the light that was repressed. And I mean, that's one of the things, there's a term called bright shadow or golden shadow that I think is really important, especially for women in recovery, because we have all these gifts that we just kind of have unconsciously kept stuff down. So really allowing that to come to the surface as well.
hmm
Both.
Do you have any examples that you would want to share from people you've worked with who have gone through a creative recovery process, and just how lives have changed through this approach?
Um, I don't have anything like specific, but just general. I mean, I can think of many people off the top of my head that like just, and I see them each week in these meetings that we do. And, because we're on the Zoom, we see the paintings in the background. And I mean, it's just remarkable every time, each week we get on a call and there's some huge colorful painting. And it's just such um, it's a visual example of how vibrant their life is, and you're seeing the person there lit up, um and their artwork is behind them. It's just, yeah, it's really, really amazing. um
And what
yeah.
do you say to the people who say, I'm not creative, I can't paint, I can't draw a straight line, this is there's no way that other people can do it, but not me. What do you say to those people?
I mean, we're all creative, we absolutely are, and this is the person who has no skills or training. They're in the best boat because they don't have to unlearn anything. And so it's what you did in kindergarten, and the whole thing is we're not trying to produce a product. This is an expression. So I'm all about like really reclaiming the creative life force that flows through each and every one of us, and taking that back from what the patriarchal programming has, that if you're going to create, it's got to be perfect, and you've got to be productive, and you've got to make money at it, or else you're just a starving artist. And yeah, I've never had any kind of formal classes. All of mine is just about expression, and I don't want it, because I don't want to know what I'm doing wrong. I'm doing air quotes. Yeah, because I really want to reclaim that I am full of this creative life force energy that wants to be expressed.
Mm-hmm. And for the people who are highly sensitive or empaths, is there something special with the creative process that goes together? I mean, I'm thinking that creativity seems like that sensitivity goes right along with the creativity, or can I don't know. How do you see those two going together?
Yeah, it's been more, I mean, I've heard so many times exactly what you said. Oh, I'm not creative, I can't draw a straight line, all that. And then when they actually get to the canvas or the art journal, it is like balm to their soul. It's like, oh, this feels so good. It's like that's been the thing they've been craving, because I think those who are, I don't even like sensitive anymore, because it has such negative connotations. So what I've kind of reframed that to highly attuned. So the highly attuned they're the most tuned into intuition and creativity. So when they start accessing it, it's just natural. And I have seen some of these women turn out to be really skilled artists as well. It just kind of naturally flows through them. So that also happens, but that's not the point. That's not the objective.
Right. And for somebody who's wanting to just get started with playing with creativity and dipping their toe in, what's your recommendation for first steps, small steps?
Just getting a big canvas and some basic colors, and just let yourself have fun. Just cover the canvas into, like, just intuitively maybe dance around, get in your body, and then what color are you most drawn to, and just get paint on the canvas, and then put another color right beside it, and then another one. Just see what happens. Just be curious, and have no attachment to how it turns out, and be willing to stop along the way, get a cup of tea, and sit back and look at it, and because there is energy in that painting. You have just put energy into it, so be sure and stop, sit back, and let it inform you. I mean, I've been amazed at how paintings will talk to me. They really communicate.
Yeah, again, this kind of communication with our deeper selves or hidden
Right.
selves. Um, yeah, that element of play is so lacking in our culture as well. I mean, even children don't seem to get to play or make art anymore, with art programs being canceled and physical education being canceled, and even kids have to be serious and focused, and what job
Right.
are they going to get? So yeah, it's almost like we've sort of lost the art of playfulness as adults, and I think also just the permission to be playful. And this also brings me back to Pisces, because there is a whimsical fantasy element to Pisces. And what you were saying earlier about getting lost in a painting, right? Being so immersed in the creative process that you're in an altered state and in some other realm. That's Pisces. And I think there is, maybe it's part of being human, that we need to have altered states of consciousness, and we don't have those kind of built in to the culture anymore. And so instead it's, okay, I'm going to drink a bunch of beer and sit in front of the television. And that's my, but there's no creativity and there's no life force and there's no, nothing, there's nothing generative about that. That's
Right.
degenerative instead. So yeah, the playfulness seems really like a key part.
Definitely. Yeah. And, if you think about somebody who's struggled with addiction, I mean, they get wild and crazy. Okay, I'm just talking about myself. That, that was some of the fun parts. It's like I wasn't so serious and I could dance and, have fun. And then when I discovered, oh, wow, I can dance and have fun and be in my body in a sober way and not have any consequences, that was just remarkable. I never dreamed. I mean, it took some work for me to get comfortable in my body and to, get the armor softening, which again comes back to this feminine approach. Is most of us are so armored up because we've been, especially the empathic, it's been protection. It's been important.
Mm-hmm.
And my other experiences that most women who are empathic and struggle with addiction also came from dysfunctional homes. And so it was just hard it was impossible to be in your gifts and be embodied because it wasn't safe. And so of course the armoring comes online. And so then the recovery is de-armoring and, really being embodied and accessing all of that mystical gift that comes with the intuitive empathic gifts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was curious about that. I was wondering because it seems like there's an association between people's high level of sensitivity and childhood trauma, that those often seem to go together. Is that, would you say there's a correlation there?
Yeah, I've always wondered which came first, yeah, I'm not sure. And yeah, I'm not sure, but the people I tend to work with, they go hand in hand, and which came first, I don't know. But there are highly sensitive people who did not grow up in dysfunctional homes. And my guess is that they have much easier access to their gifts than those who've had trauma.
Right, right. Because it's very, very challenging to be super sensitive in an environment that is abusive.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and I'm also curious about your family constellation work. I've had a little bit of experience with that, and I know it's so powerful. How do you bring that into your work?
Um, well, I mean, the other thing I've definitely found is we've had these generations of, World War One, two, three. No, not three. That's where we are now. Sorry. Vietnam, all these wars, and our ancestors have gone through so much, just so much trauma, and things didn't get processed. And so that's my understanding of family constellation work, is that intense things have to be acknowledged and processed. And when they don't, the energy just keeps getting passed generation after generation. And then it shows up. It doesn't necessarily show up in the same way that it originated, but it keeps showing up in, addiction and patterns and illness and things like that. And so I feel like we're really living in a time now that so many of us are here for the purpose of healing the generational trauma. And so we can step into the quantum field and acknowledge what has happened in the lineages. We may not know the exact details, but just to acknowledge on an energetic level, it helps it relax. And that then helps us to relax in our body, and also acknowledging, this isn't mine to carry. It was the ancestors. And I have been carrying it, and now we're acknowledging it, but I'm sending it back. This is yours to carry, and really asking for the ancestors' support as we evolve beyond them. And I always feel, I mean, just like that experience with Bill W this morning, like he wants this recovery thing to evolve. Our ancestors want us to evolve. So,
Hmm. And I feel like family constellation is also, in a sense, a very Piscean modality because it does work, like you're saying, with the quantum field. It's very magical and mind-blowing what can happen in a session, and it definitely defies our sort of limits or boundaries around space and time and what we think we need to know in order to heal something or to, yeah, like it brings in a different kind of knowing that I think has more to do with that, the field, our intuition, and how we are so affected by these invisible matrices,
mm,
you know, of our ancestors, of the culture. Have Did you get into it because you had your own experience of self-healing with family constellation and then wanted to learn how to do it? Was that
yeah.
your entry?
Yeah, because I was so armored up that once I got into recovery, I was creating and all that was flowing through, but I couldn't access deep emotions. I knew they were in there, but like I never cried. And so by doing family constellations and representing somebody else, stepping into their energy field, I was able to just like crack wide open and just roar with and it felt so good. It was so liberating. And it's a real empathy builder too, because when you step in, I mean, I can just think of some of the like harsh situations that I was representing, stepping into the energy field of somebody who was, really misogynistic or something like that. But when you keep dropping in deeper and deeper into the energy, you get to this root, just fear and insecurity and that kind of thing. So it's a real empathy builder. It's
Mm.
truly multi-dimensional work because you're helping that person's lineage, you're gaining your own healing. It's an empathy builder. It's yeah, very mind-blowing.
Hmm. Do you think that the healing does go back in time?
I do.
Yeah.
I really do. And I've seen, over time, it's remarkable how quickly things can happen too, that somebody is doing a constellation and 2 days later the family member they haven't talked to in 12 years calls them, or things like that. It just yeah, story after story of you just can't make this stuff up. So
Hmm.
yeah.
So cool. Do you family constellation work in groups, or is there a way that you also work with people just one
One
on
on
one?
both. Yeah, it's very powerful to do it one-on-one as well. And the other thing I really like about doing constellation work is the more that we practice stepping into the quantum field, the more we access it just in day-to-day life, which I think that is the Aquarian age, that we really understand how expansive and multidimensional we are and what we have access to. But again, it takes that practice. We can't just go from this 3D reality to all this with it. It needs some containers. So
Right. Right. Building a new muscle to expand out of the hyper-materialist box that most of us grew up in and were, our multidimensional selves got squished into, and we have to practice and learn how to take ourselves out of there, which, and coming back to the nervous system, that can also, we don't want to go too far out too quickly because then we blow our circuits and
right.
maybe can't handle it at a body level. So yay Saturn for the slow build and the, showing up consistently and having the right containers. So yeah, Tammy, I love what you're up to. Your work sounds so rich and just so on point for where we're at. Before I let you go, let people know how they can find you. I'll include links in the show notes as well. And if you have any upcoming events that you want to let people know about.
Yes. So tammyroth.com, everything's always on my website. And the recovery circles, it's called the Unstoppable Dream. And the recovery circles are ongoing. And so all of that link is on my website too. But am always happy to offer anybody a free, one-time free, so they can just email me and say, hey, I want to come to the circle, and I'll send a Zoom link. And then, yes, I have a retreat coming up. I live in just a remarkable hidden place in Florida. It's called the Forgotten Coast, and it's undeveloped, and it's like stepping back in time. And so I have a retreat in April. I have one spot left that I'm going to try to convince Emily to come to.
Twist my arm.
Yeah. And yeah, that's the main stuff that's going on for me right now. And then I'm on Facebook and Instagram too.
And then you do work with people for one-on-one coaching,
Yes.
is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
particularly women, and particularly women in recovery, or
Yeah, but I've used recovery loosely. I would say more women who are seekers on this path, and really looking to step into what's calling. And
right?
I love clearing the blocks that block people from their true calling, what their soul's calling for.
Beautiful. Any final thoughts that you want to leave us with?
No, I'm just so grateful for what you're doing. I mean, every podcast I listen to, you just have such remarkable people, and you're very skilled at interviewing. So thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Tammy. It's been really wonderful to connect with you.
Yes, you too.
Oops.